Okay, then we're up to Daf Pei Tes, and you recall that we had the case of a mixture of 5 Pesachim, one of which was Puzzle. It had a Yabelis, it had a Moon. We don't know which one it was and to whom it belongs. And the question is, we cannot eat the basar of any of these 5 because each one might be Puzzle. And then we said that you cannot, in this case, expect that will bring a Pesach Sheini. And the Gemara challenged this premise that was brought in the Brisa that they're all 5 potter from Pesach Sheini, because actually one out of the 5 was not Yotze because his carbon was Puzzle, it was a Baal Moon. He needs a Pesach Sheini. Why is it that all of them, all 5, are potter from Pesach Sheini? One of them certainly desperately needs the Pesach Sheini. The other 4 we Yotze with Pesach Rishon, but we don't know who they are. So the Gemara says, why don't we bring? So the Gemara says, Lo Efshad, there's no possibility of allowing a Pesach Sheini. So the Gemara says, why not? Why can't everyone bring a Pesach Sheini? So let's say all 5 of them, each one will bring a Pesach Sheini, then you have a problem of Chulin Lazar because 4 out of the 5 are Chulin. You can't bring a Pesach Sheini if you're already Yotzei Pesach Rishon. So the Gemara then asks, why don't they bring just simply one Pesach on behalf of all 5 of them, one Pesach Sheini? And that should certainly cover your bases. And this seems like a perfect solution to the problem. But the Gemara says, no, that's not a solution to the problem because you're going to have a shechita of one carbon Pesach, shalolim nuya, because only 1 out of the 5 is manu. And you went ahead and you brought one carbon Pesach on behalf of all of them. That's shalolim nuya, because 4 out of 5 are not capable of eating this carbon Pesach. So the Gemara says, you know what? Let each one of them bring his own carbon Pesach and make a Tanai. If my carbon Pesach was a Tamim and I was Yotze already, then let this be a carbon Shlomim. If an event that mine was the one that had a Yabelis, and I did not fulfill my mitzvah of carbon Pesach, then let this be a carbon Pesach. So the Gemara says that's also impossible. And on the top of Pei Tes, the Gemara introduces Chazav Shok of Khan. Now, it's a carbon Shlomim on that side because he was Yotze with the first carbon, and he's chayav to give Chazav Shok to the Khan. However, if it's a carbon Pesach, then the Kohanim are not manui, they're not included in those registered on the carbon Pesach, and then it would be achilut shalolim nuya. So we're in a bind. We cannot solve the problem of the chaz v'shok. On the side that it's a carbon shlomim, the chaz v'shok is given to the Kohanim, and they'll eat the chaz v'shok. On the side that it's a carbon Pesach, it's shalolim nuya. If these Kohanim were not registered on the carbon Pesach, they can't eat the chaz v'shok. So the Gemara asks the following: why not invite the Kohanim to participate in this carbon Pesach? In other words, let's find 5 Kohanim who are chayav in Pesach Sheini. They did not fulfill Pesach Rishon, and let each one of these 5 accompany another one of these 5 speikos. And once again, now it could be a Tanai that if we were already Yotze, then it's carbon Shlomim, and if we weren't Yotze, then it's a carbon Pesach. What was your kasha? Chaz v'shok. So he says that if kol chad v'chad kohen ba'day, and the Kohen will now be money on the Carbon Pesach. So Mimanavshach, the Kohen accompanying the Yisrael, could eat from the Chaz of Shog. If it's Shlamim, then Adarabbi has to eat the Chaz of Shog, and that's what we'll give him. If it's Carbon Pesach, he's money on the Carbon Pesach. So the Gemara says that that's impossible as well. Why is that impossible? Hi Kohen Hechidom, Idi Ovid Pesach. It's Hi Pesach, who nimtza Pesach Nechal Shalolim Nuya. If the one second, if what the Kohen already brought his Carbon Pesach, so once again, right, he can't be Manu. You follow what I'm saying? Let's say Ruvain invites a Kohen. If this Kohen has already brought his Carbon Pesach, then assuming that this Ruvain was not Yotze, right? In other words, he was the one who had the Balmum. So then this is a real Carbon Pesach, and the Kohen can't be Manui because he already was Yotze. Okay? Idelo Avid Pesach. So if we can catch a Kohen, fall in a Kohen who did not participate in the first Pesach, is Dilma Shlamim who below Avid Pesach. Maybe this Reuven, who's bringing a Kohen, was already Yotze with Pesach Rishon. In which case, this Carbon is a Shlomim. That's not going to help the Kohen much because he wasn't Yotze his Chiyuv of Carbon Pesach, and he can't be Yotze with the Shlomim. So again, just to review, if the Kohen was already Yotze, then he can't be part of this minui for the Pesach Sheini. And if, on the other hand, he wasn't Yotze, and he desperately needs the Pesach Sheini, so now he's in trouble because the other fellow who's bringing this Carbon and has invited the Kohen to participate, it could very well be that he had already been Yotze, because 4 out of 5 chances are that he was Yotze with the first Carbon, and now this Carbon becomes Shlomim. And now you've precluded the Kohen from being Yotze if he wasn't Yotze the mitzvah Carbon Pesach. So then the Gemara asks the following question. Why don't we bring each one of the 5 people will bring a Carbon Pesach, and each one will bring a Kohen who did not fulfill his Carbon Pesach. V'nimnei iloye hani chamisha psach, and he will invite the Kohen to be manui in all 5 karbanos. And now we're fine. Why? Because Mimanavshach, the Kohen, could eat the carbon. He wasn't Yotze with his first carbon. He'll be Yotze now with the second carbon. And this second carbon is certainly a Carbon Pesach because one of the 5 people, we don't know which one, needs the Carbon Pesach. So Gemara says, Mimanavshach, Ika Chad, the law of it Pesach. We know for sure that one of them did not bring the Pesach. And now, by inviting this Kohen to be Manui, he's now money together with that one unidentified individual who needs the Carbon Pesach, Kanafki Bey. Right? The Kohen can eat the Chaz v'shok of these Karbanos. And one of them is going to be a carbon Pesach, and it'll be Yotzei Eschiyuv of carbon Pesach. So why are you telling me that we can't bring a Pesach Sheini? Each one of us is going to bring a carbon Pesach with a Tnai. And each one of us is going to point this Kohen as being Manui on the carbon Pesach. And now we have a perfect Yimon of Shach. Let the Kohen eat because of a Shok. If it's Shlamim, fine. And if it's carbon Pesach, A, the Kohen has not been Yotze yet, and B, we know that one person of these five needs desperately a carbon Pesach Sheini because he brought a move and it was possible for the first carbon. And since the Kohen is going to eat from all these carbonos, 4 out of 5 he's eating midin shlamim of chaz v'shok. 1 out of 5 he's eating as a carbon Pesach. What's the problem?
There's no chaz v'shok on carbon Pesach, though, is there?
Say it again.
There's no chaz v'shok on the carbon Pesach.
No, again, chaz v'shok is part of a carbon Pesach. It doesn't have a din of
There's no din of
shlamim, but
right.
it's
no, but it doesn't have a din of. There's no din of chaz v'shok on carbon Pesach altogether.
No, but I'm just saying there's a din of achilas Pesach, which is eaten by all the menuyim, and this Kohen who's going to eat from all these 5 karbanos, he doesn't know which one of them, but one of them he's eating the chaz v'shok as Pesach, and he's yotzei his mitzvah of Pesach Sheini. He'll get a kazayis basar of Pesach. We don't know which one it is. And the other 4 from which he's eating chaz v'shok, he's eating b'torah shlamim.
Yeah, but he always has to get. He'll have to get chaz v'shok for all 5 of them, though. They have to get that portion, though, chaz v'shok.
What do you mean he has to give back? What does he have to give back?
He has to get it. No, he has to eat it. He has to get.
Oh yeah. Obviously, he's going to be eating a lot of muscle on the night of Pesach. He's going to be eating a lot of meat. He's going to be eating chaz v'shok from 5 different karbanos.
But you keep it etzem lo yishpruvo. He won't be able to.
That's also true. Yeah, I was asking about the bracha. You're asking about the etzem. He doesn't know which one of these 5 is really the carbon Pesach. He's going to be using the carbon Pesach with one of the 5, but Mimanav Shach will fulfill his obligation of carbon Pesach. Yeah. And there's no problem of minui because he was participating in the minui of all 5 karbanos, and he has a right to do so because he wasn't Yotzei Pesach Rishon. So you have to find a Kohen who is not Yotzei Pesach Rishon. You have to gather together this group of 5 people. Each one is going to set up a carbon, which is a Safek carbon Pesach Safek Shlamim, and each one of them is going to offer to that Kohen chaz v'shok. The Kohen is eating 5 chaz v'shoks, one of which is a carbon Pesach, and via which he'll be yotzei his mitzvah of carbon Pesach. But now the problem is of being a motzi kodshin lebeis hasreif. It says memaid achila shlamim, and being memaid achila shlamim, we'll explain what that means in a minute. But just to mention here the Migdash David, he says that he's being gorem Sreifas Kodshim Ksher, which is called Nosar. One second, let me just make sure. Lo Pirsha Tam Mishum Dioslamait Zman Achila Mishum Shu Gorem Shivu Kodshim Lidei Nosar Barat. Yeah. So we have here an Isur, which is called Lemait Zman Achila. In the language of the Gemara, Memait Be Achilas Shlomim. But really the Be here of Achila means Bizman Achila. Now, a Shlomim could be eaten for 2 days. The Karm Pesach could be eaten only for 1 day. 1 day means 1 day past its Shechita. That means the daytime of the 14th and the night of the 15th. With daybreak of the 15th, any basar that was not eaten is called nosa. And we're not allowed to take kachim and make it into nosa, which is a psul aguf. So we have to eat until we finish all the basar. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that has to be done before chatzos, midnight. Now, if this is in fact shlamim, then not only would it not become nosar the next morning, but there would be a mitzvah achila during the next 12 hours. We're going to give him a second day, sandwiched by the night in between. Now you've made a t'nai. You've said that if this is a Pesach, then I'm yotzei my Pesach Sheini. And that's good for the one person who had the Balmud. If on the other hand it's not a Pesach, let it be shlamim. And 4 out of these karbanos, 4 out of 5, will be shlamim, which means that there's a mitzvah achila on the 15th of Nisan. You know, if I would ask you a quiz question, when could you have a mitzvah achilas Pesach on the 15th? You can't. But what you could do is, in a case of a t'nai, that maybe it's shlamim, you would be eating the carbon on the 15th, but you can't eat the carbon on the 15th because maybe it's a Pesach. And if you wait until the next morning, it becomes nosa. Now, in and of itself, as if it was a Pesach, and I knew it was a Pesach, for sure, that would be no problem. I would force you to eat the meat, and the mitzvah would be restricted to that night. And buddy, if you don't finish eating all the meat, by daybreak it becomes nosar, and that you're not allowed to do to make it into nosar. But the problem is he was makdish shlamim, but he was makdish it right on a t'nai of shlamim because 4 out of 5 need shlamim. On the t'nai that it's shlamim, then he's made it a carbon where he was mamayit zman achila, because as a result of the fact that it might be a carbon pesach, he's going to be limited in his time period of achila until the morning. Whereas if it were shlamim, we'd give him the next period of time. Now, what is now I mentioned to you the Mikdash David. The Mikdash David is vacillating. What is the reasoning behind this prohibition of being mamayit zman achilas kodshim? Shlamim in this case. And he offers 2 possibilities and he accepts one. One possibility is that it's going to become nosa. And the other possibility is that he's going to be burning kodshim. Now, if he treats this basar, this carbon as shlamim, which means that he can wait until the next day to eat the basar, then it became nosa. Why? You're telling me that it's a mitzvah to eat it tomorrow. Why did it become nosa? The answer is because it might be a carbon pesach. So b'Torah's Pesach, on that side, he created nosa. At the same time, you could say something totally different. And that is that with daybreak, he is going to be chayav in streifas kodshim shenifselu, meaning on the side that it's a carbon pesach, it became possible because of the Isur Nosar with the morning. Now he's going to have to go out and burn the lamb. Instead of eating it, he's going to be burning it. And it has Kedushas Karma on the side that it's a shlamim. We don't know that it's a carbon pesach. And now he's going to take shlamim and he's going to burn it. That's an Isur Sreifas Kodshim. So the Mikdash David is medaik from Rashi, that Rashi says that the reason why also l'mayid zman achilasa is because yesh lachshos sheyisrov kodshim, meaning kodshim ksherim on the side that it's shlom. So the Mikdash David said, why did Rashi have to introduce the Isur of Sreifas kodshim ksherim? Why didn't he just say there's an Isur of nosa? He says because the Isur list of kodshim ksherim is an Isur chamur relative to the Isur of nosar, because with regard to burning kodshim ksherim, there's a separate lav in the Torah. Lo sasun kein l'Hashem Elokeichem. The Torah says you're not allowed to. I'm sorry, that you're required to destroy all the, the altars and the and all the Getchkes, all the Avodah Zarah of the 7 nations that occupy Palestine. You have to destroy that. And the Torah says, Lo sasim kein l'Hashem Elokeichem. What you are required and obligated to do in terms of destruction, vis-a-vis Avodah Zarah, you're not allowed to do for Hashem Elokeichem. Anything that's Lashem meaning that it's Hegdesh. So you can't destroy a Hegdesh. And destroying Hegdesh is a violation of an Isur Chamor if the Hegdesh is kosher. Adarab, once it becomes possible, then you have to burn it. That's your mitzvah. But if it's not possible and it's kosher, like this carbon on the side that it's a shlamim, because he was already yotze with his first carbon, which is an 80% possibility, then you're going to burn kachim and violate this lav of lo sasin kein l'Hashem Elokeichem. To create nosar is what we call shevi altas. By not eating it, you created nosar. That's not an avera per se. It's only a bittul essay. In other words, you mevatel the essay of eating it in its time allotment. And there's a mitzvah to eat kachim in its time allotment. And that itself is a big issue. Maybe it's only the kohanim, but not these, whatever. So causing it to become nosar is bad enough. But what's a lot worse is that now you're going to take kachim sherim and you're going to burn it. Now, yesterday, Alan asked me, why don't we just force him to eat it all up at night? But again, this is only the Tama Isur. There's the Gedera Isur, and then there's the Tama Isur. The Gedera Isur, the definition of the Isur exists on its own. You're not allowed to be Mamayit, the Zman Achil of a carbon. Why? Because we're afraid you won't eat it on time. So you'll tell me, what do you mean? Why do you have to be afraid he won't eat it on time? We'll force him, we'll stand there with a stick and we'll make sure that he eats it on time. That's not how the halacha operates. The halacha says, you're not allowed to be mamayit this man kachim. And on the side that this is shlamim, it's got another day of achila. And you've cut it down because you set it aside and designated it as a carbon pesach, which can only be people alive. That you're not allowed to do.
What about can he eat it between chasos and alos shachar? Because that's only is it rabbanan according to one man number.
He can eat it. He can eat it the whole night, from my perspective, but he won't be able to eat it after daybreak. And it's shlamim. 80% chance that it's shlamim, and shlamim could be eaten another day. You're cutting down zman achila by 12 hours, and that's a violation of being mamayit zman achilas kachim. In this case, shlamim. Generally speaking, when we talk about being mamayit zman achila of kachim, we mean shlamim, because shlamim, as opposed to all the other karbanos, gets the extra day.
Right. Well, what about feeding it to a kid?
What do you say?
What about feeding it to a kid, to a little kid?
Again, you're missing the point, Alan.
Yeah.
We don't have to feed it to a kid. We can eat it at night.
No, I understand.
The point is that we're not allowed to be mamayit zman achila, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're being mamayit zman achila because you're not allowed to eat the carbon pesach after daybreak. If you eat the carbon pesach after daybreak, you are violating an Isur kares of achilas nosar. You've virtually cut down the zman achilas kachim on assuming by 12 hours. I don't care how you're going to eat it, give it to a kata, that's not relevant. What we have to keep in mind is that by making this tnai, that it might be a pesach, it might be a shlamim, you are being mamayit zman achilas shlam, and that you're not allowed to do. Why you're not allowed to do? Again, that's the Mikdash David, vacillating back and forth, but whatever it is, the bottom line is you're not allowed to do that. So the Gemara is, now we're up to V'neisei. If you want to look inside, so we're going to look at V'neisei. I mean, this is where we got up to more or less yesterday. And it is, I would say, maybe 12 lines down from the top of the Amud on Peites. The first word of the line is Yamin. If you move along towards the left, you'll see V'neisei. V'neisei Mosar HaPesach. So here we got into the concept called Mosar HaPesach, which again is a behemoth that you designated as a Korban Pesach. It got lost. In the meantime, you brought a substitute replacement carbon, and now you found the original. And that has the din of Mosar Pesach. Now, Mosar Pesach is Shlomim. Again, this is all sugyas that we have to cover in other parts of Shas. But in any event, we have something called Mosar Pesach. Now, the anomaly or the strange entity called Mosar Pesach is that on the one hand, it was originally designated as a Pesach. On the other hand, it now has a din of Shlomim. And on the third hand, it can only be eaten Yom V'Layla, like a Korban Pesach. So V'nema, right, we're afraid, keep in mind that they already were Yotzei the first Korban Pesach because it wasn't a Baal Moon. So they're going to take this Behema, and with it, they're going to be Mekayim the mitzvah of Pesach Sheini on the tzad 1 out of 5 that they were not Yotzei with Pesach Rishon. And what is this lamb, that they're taking for Korban Pesach? They're going to make the following statement, the following declaration. Idi balmum. If I was not Yotzei the first Pesach, is high the I see hashta in every Pesach, let this lamb now be a Korban Pesach, Pesach Sheini. Ve'idi tamu, and if I was already Yotzei Pesach Rishon, nehevi high the I see hashta shlomim. Let this be a Korban Shlomim. But its din should be that of Mosar Pesach. In other words, since the Torah recognizes the entity, right, the beast that's called Mosar Pesach, as a Korban Shlomim that's only eaten for the night and for the day and the following night, I can make the following tonight. If I need this as a Pesach, because I was not Yotzei, let it be a Korban Pesach. And if I do not need this as a Pesach because I was already Yotzei the Rishon, let this be Mosar Pesach. And the Gemara is assuming now that you can create a Hegdesh, a Kedusha called Mosar Pesach, of this strange anomaly of an animal, a carbon that's Shlomim, but its time is limited like that of a Pesach. And if you could create that Chal Hashem Hegdesh of Mosar, then you've solved your problem of Tanai. Because your problem was you're being Mamaitz Manachilas HaKodshim, and not being Mamaitz Manachilas HaKodshim, because I'm giving it the status of what kind of Shlomim? Mosar Pesach.
Yeah, but then why isn't that Brera? Isn't that a Brera shows that L'chadchila you were over?
Again, we're talking not about Brera, we're talking about Tanai. Tanai means that if it's X, right, if X is true, then this is what I want. If on the other hand X is not true, then let it be this. That's called Tanai. I mean, nobody's introducing Brera. Brera would be the question if I had an undefined minui. Like, for example, I'm going to decide later on whether I want this minui or not. I'm not undecided here. I'm offering two possible chalosim. Either it be a chalos of Pesach or a chalos of Shlomim. And that was okay. The Gemara never had a problem with that. The Gemara had a problem that now, because you're telling me it might be Pesach, therefore you're being Mamaitz Manachil. So the answer is, he's not just saying that let it be Shlomim. He's saying let it be Mosar Pesach. And that thing of Shlomim is limited to Yom V'Layla.
But then you're being Mamayit. You are being Mamayit. You're not being Mamayit. You're not being Mamayit.
You're not being Mamayit Manachil, because again, this Manachil of Mosar Pesach is night and day.
No, but what you are doing is
the other way around, day and night.
You're leaving over L'chadchila Mosar.
What are you talking about? What are you talking? I'm not leaving anything over. I'm going to eat the basar in the time allotment. I mean, the time allotment is identical. Whether I was Yotzei the first Korban Pesach or not, in either case, the time allotment for this particular lamb that I'm bringing on the 14th of Iyar is Yom V'Layla.
Yeah, but it's no sir, isn't it? You said it was no sir. If I was really chayiv in a Korban Pesach, then what's going to be left over is no, sir. What else is it?
Who's leaving it over? Nobody's leaving it over. He's eating it. He's eating it. He just doesn't know what bracha to make on it. Meaning, he's eating it not knowing whether it's shlamim or it's carbon pesach. That he doesn't know, and he'll never know. But Mimanashach, he'll be yotzei the mitzvah. Either he'll be yotzei the mitzvah of shlamim, so Zaygezund, he gave a shlam as a carbon adava, or he was yotzei the mitzvah of Pesach because he was not yotzei Pesach Rishon. But he's not being remayit this man achila because he's being magdashed as a shlamim b'toras Mosar Pesach, and it has all the dinim of a shlamim of Mosar Pesach, which means that the maximum time for achila is going to be day and night. He'll eat it. Mimarshach, he has to eat it.
What about the shok? You don't have to worry about the shok and the kohen now.
Again, we're going to go through that whole thing again. He's going to bring another kohen along with him, and they're going to make a tnai that if it's a shlamim, then he said as shok because of a shok, and this kohen was not say the first carbon pesach. So if not, he'll eat it as a carbon pesach. I don't have to go through all the.
All right, the chad gadya again. All right, but okay.
Oh, so the Gemara rejects. There's no such thing as creating a shlamim that has the dinim of a Mosar Pesach.
Yeah,
there's a reality of a Mosar Pesach if they got lost, etc. But to create a carbon shlamim with the dinim of a carbon Mosar Pesach, that you can't do. Gemara says, "V'chi mafrishin tchila mosaros." He says, "Is there such a thing as being magdish something, an animal?" From the get-go, the kedusha of a Mosar Pesach, either it is a Mosar Pesach or it's not. But he's taking a lamb and he's being magdish as a carbon Mosar Pesach. There ain't no such thing. And there's a whole discussion here in the commentaries as to what the Gemara thought in the Havamina and what the Gemara thinks in the Maskana, why it rejected this. But the bottom line is, I'm just going to summarize the Gemara's conclusion. There's no such thing. Mosar Pesach is an entity in a situation where you had a Kedushas Carbon Pesach, but it's no longer Pesach because you brought a substitute carbon. And the Torah now, after the period of time of Yudalid passes because you already brought a substitute Pesach, at that point, the Torah deals with the status of that lamb that was originally a carbon Pesach, and it transforms it into a quasi carbon shlamim. But you can't take a behemoth chulin and single it out and designate it as a Mosar Pesach with the dinim of Mosar Pesach. Mosar Pesach is a reality, and if it's not a reality, you can't create it artificially.
You're saying that Mosar Pesach is not something you do, something that comes onto something that has a din of Mosar.
The reality creates the din of Mosar Pesach, but you can't create a hegdesh from the get-go and take a behemoth chulin and make it into into Mosar Pesach. So Gemara asks, wait a minute, v'nitrichu v'naisi Mosar Pesach. Why don't we search the globe? I always use just the phrase of send out social media. Who's holding on to a Mosar Pesach? I'm looking for a Mosar Pesach. So we'll be matriachim and we'll ask him, we'll tell him to walk around, knock on every door, and ask, do you happen to have a Mosar Pesach? Because your lamb got, jumped the gun and you lost it, and you brought another Pesach, and now you found the lamb.
Yeah, but
and if that be the case, wait a minute. Let's just understand the Gemara's question. Give me a few minutes, Alan. So the Gemara is saying that let him go find a Mosar Pesach. Nosru lahem karbanos. Maybe there were karbanos that were originally designated as a Pesach, and now they're spare. And he'll make a tnai. Again, we're going to have to find 5 of these. And it's hard enough to find one, but we're going to find 5. So each one of these 5 gentlemen are going to locate a Mosar Pesach, and they make the following tnai. They're going to say the following. If we weren't Yotzei, actually it's if I weren't Yotzei, if I'm the culprit, I had the Balas Mum, then let this be a Carbon Pesach lichovasa, which it certainly can be, because it was designated as a Carbon Pesach. And he can use it now for Pesach Sheini. If, on the other hand, I was holding on to a tam and I was yotze with the first Carbon Pesach, let this be a Mosar Pesach as it is right now. And once again, he's not being mamayit the Zman of Achila. So you told me you can't be Magdish a Carbon, meaning Chulin, as a Carbon Mosar Pesach. Let me just get a hold of a Mosar Pesach. And once I get a hold of a Mosar Pesach, I can make my Tanai. Either this is a real McCoy Carbon Pesach, or it's a Mosar Pesach. And it'll be eaten day and the following night.
But you can't be, he was not a Monoi.
No, there is no minui on this carbon. It's Mosar Pesach. Mosar Pesach has no minui. Mosar Pesach has the status of Shlamim. Now he purchases, he'll pay off the guy, a couple of piastres, and he'll become money on this carbon Shlamim, which is Mosar Pesach. That's
again, you're the same pickle you were before. You can't suddenly have a Mosar Pesach if you didn't have a Pesach.
No. What are you talking about? This lamb has the status of Mosar Pesach. It no longer has minui because the minui was replaced by another minui and another carbon Pesach. Now it has the status of Mosar Pesach. It's basically a carbon Shlam. Now I can take this carbon Shlam and I can designate it as a carbon Pesach, set up a new minui, but now I have the ability to make it Tanai. Why? Because if I was Yotze, let me go the other way around. If I wasn't Yotze, let this be a carbon Pesach. And now we're creating a new minui for this Pesach Sheini for the 14th. If, on the other hand, I was already Yotze and now I don't need a carbon Pesach, leave well enough as is, let it be a Mosar Pesach, which is Shlamim, and its time limitation is 1 day and 1 night. So I was not Mamayit. At this point, the Gemara raises its hands and concedes that there is a way of solving this problem. So if there is a way of solving this problem, why do we assume that there's no chiyuv of Pesach Sheini? We can find a way, where there's a will, there's a way of being Yotzei Pesach Sheini. And again, we have to go through this in order to be, because 1 out of the 5 people desperately needs a Pesach Sheini. The Gemara says another problem, that we were totally oblivious of this problem. And that's the problem with smicha. Because a carbon Pesach does not have smicha. It's not ordained. I'm just joking. Ella says the Gemara, you know why you can't bring this Pesach and make it tonight? And if I was already Yotze, let it be Shlamim. Mishum smicha dilu Pesach lo boy smicha. Again, what that means, Pesach lo boy smicha, right? Smicha means that you put 2 hands on top of the carbon before they shecht it. And every carbon that you have to bring, and you have an obligation to bring it, requires smicha with one exception, and that's Pesach. Again, I'm not going into Bechar and Maser. That's a whole different.
Yeah, but why don't you just do that tonight also?
Okay, just give me a second. Wait a minute.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I didn't finish. You cut me off in the middle.
Oh,
okay. Sorry. So the Gemara says the following: the ilu Pesach lo boy smicha. Right? We don't know if this is a carbon Pesach or not. On the side that it's a carbon Pesach for that individual who was Yotze, who had the Balmum and was not Yotze on the first round, then there's no smicha. But the ilu Mosar Pesach, on the side that he was already Yotze with the first Pesach, he doesn't need a carbon Pesach. And this Kedusha is Mosar, because I got it from my buddy, and it's Mosar Pesach. It's Shlamim. Shlamim boy smicha. So this Tnai is not going to work, because on B'Toras Shlamim, I'm chayiv in smicha. B'Toras Pesach, it's asur b'smicha. Why is it asur b'smicha? He says, you know what? The carbon Pesach is excluded from smicha. It's not just a p'tur. Now, Tosus Dibra Maschal Hani
So you think it's over
raises the following question. He says, okay, you know what? Leave out smicha. You're worried that maybe indeed it's a Karban Pesach because you weren't Yotze the first Pesach. Just drop smicha. And Tosfos says, b'di'eved im lo samach, even if you have a Karban Shlomim which requires smicha, the law is that if the Karban was brought without smicha, you are Yotze. It's not a critical part. It's a separate Chovas Gavra of smicha. But nevertheless, Chatchila, says Tosfos, you're not allowed to bring a Karban Shlomim and omit smicha. So therefore, says Tosfos, we're not going to allow him to bring a Pesach Sheini in an ofen where he will have to be mavatel the mitzvah of smicha on a Shlomim, and 80% chances are it's a Karban Shlomim. Now wait a second. Tosfos says, he stops dead in his tracks, and he asks himself the following question. Wait a second. This man might need a Karban Pesach desperately because he brought a Baal Muma in the first round. The Isur and the punishment for non-compliance with the mitzvah of Karban Pesach is kares. So make your choice. You have two options. You could bring a Karban and there's an 80% chance that you are being mavatal the mitzvah smicha because it's a Karban Shlomim. And you are passively undermining a kiyum mitzvah that is required on that side. On the other side, to avoid being mevatel the mitzvah smicha, you're going to be chayiv kares, or you might be chayiv kares because you weren't yotze with the Karban Pesach. He says v'afal gav shebikah, by telling him that he's not going to bring the Pesach Sheini with the Tnai because he might be oker the mitzvah of smicha on the side that it's a, so therefore yikanes l'safek isur kares. Now Tosfos introduces Rov for the first time. I mean, but this is something that's been on the back of our minds for the whole sugya. I mean, 80% chance is that he's not chayiv in a Karban Pesach. He says, "Kevon rubam kfar also Pesach." 4 out of 5 brought the Karban Pesach. Elavak echad mem lo yotza. It's adif sheyidches safek kares b'shem v'al taseh me'asher yasu rubam davar shelo kahog. Unbelievable. He's saying that if you're going to allow for all these 5 gentlemen to bring a Pesach Sheini, which is really now Mosar Pesach, but with a Tnai, that on the side, that I was the one out of the 5 that needs a Pesach, and therefore I can't do smicha, then what you're doing is you are setting up a situation where 4 out of 5 people will bring a Karban knowing full well that they won't be able to do smicha. The 4 out of the 5 who were Yotze already, Pesach Rishon, and now they're bringing this Karban b'torah Shlamim, and it requires smicha. Those 5 are bringing a Karban knowing full well, so to speak, that they won't be able to do smicha. So you're being mevatel the mitzvah smicha times 4. You know what? The better option, says Tosfos, is that no one brings the Karban. There's 1 out of the 5 who now has not been Yotze his mitzvah of Karban Pesach. He says that's called Shev V'al Taseh. And not only that, for each one of them, it's a suffix. So it's a suffix kares b'Shev V'al Taseh with a rov that says it's not kares because you already Yotze in the mitzvah of Karban Pesach. Says Tosfos, in this choice of having 5 people actively bringing a Pesach, bringing a Karban. That's a Sheini, right? And being mevatel the mitzvah of smicha, that's an action, bekuvase, to be mevatel the mitzvah smicha on 4 counts. What's the other option? We're not going to be mevatel the mitzvah smicha. No one's going to bring a Karban, and 1 out of the 5 gentlemen is violating the mitzvah of Karban Pesach, which is a chiyuv kares, but we don't know who that is. Rov tells me it's not me, and each one has the right to say that. And not only that, it's b'Shev V'al Taseh.
No way.
So the
No
Gemara
way.
says, Ha tenach Karbon anoshim. The law is that if a male, brings a carbon shlomim, he's chayav in smicha. But if a female brings a carbon shlomim, there's no smicha. She has to stand somewhere and watch the whole process of the carbon, but she doesn't do smicha. Is therefore carbon noshim ma'ikal mema. We already sent out a clarion call. Who has a Mosar Pesach that can, a spare Mosar Pesach? We're going to now cut it down even more specifically. Which woman has a Mosar Pesach? Once we get a Mosar Pesach of a woman, then you have no problem with smicha, because a woman is not chayiv in smicha. So even on the side that you were yotze with the first Pesach, and now the second Pesach is a carbon shlomim, and Mosar Pesach is as such, you're not being mevatel in mitzvah smicha. Why? Because it's a Mosar Pesach of an Isha. Now, how do we know that a woman is not included in smicha? So the reason for that is because, according to one opinion, smicha requires what's called kol kocho. You have to put all your energy into the carbon, onto the animal. And noshim, it says, Daber al bnei Yisrael v'samach yado. And it says, if I'm not mistaken, Yoda v'lo Yoda. Let me just make sure. No. It says Daber al bnei Yisrael v'samach Yodo is bnei Yisrael v'lo bnos Yisrael. When we can't aim bnos Yisrael samchos. So this animal, this lamb, if it's not a carbon Pesach, then it's a carbon shlomim. But it's owned by an Isha, no matter what. And a carbon shlomim of an Isha does not get smicha. And at this point, again, the Gemara concedes defeat. I have to come up with another reason why we couldn't solve the problem here of that one person who needs a carbon Pesach and should bring a carbon Pesach Sheini. Ella, says the Gemara, mishum matanos. The problem is that there's a difference between a carbon shlomim and a carbon Pesach with regard to the matanos, meaning to the zrikas hadam. The ilu Pesach rak matana achas, ve'ilu shlomim shtayim shein arba. In the case of the carbon Pesach, and this is a sugya Masechet Zvachim on Daf Nun Vav, the Gemara derives that you do a matana on one of the four sides of the mizbeach, and that's it. Whereas a carbon shlomim requires that you set up the zrikas adam on two corners, right? Let's say you do one zrika on the, just give me a second. We're going up from east to west. So we get the northeastern corner, and then he does a zrika on the southwestern corner. And in that way, the dam flows down and it covers all four sides of the mizbeach. And that's the requirement in the case of a carbon shlomim. That's called shtayim, two matana shein arba. Meaning, even though he actually did two actions of zrika, but it's dam on four sides of the mizbeach shein arba. Okay. So now, let's understand what goes on. Let's try to just figure out what the Gemara is thinking of. The Gemara is saying the following. This lamb might be a carbon Pesach. And in fact, one of the five, and none of them know who it is, has to bring it as a carbon Pesach. And therefore, the Zrikas Adam will be on one corner of the Mizbeach. That's called Matana Achas. If, on the other hand, let's say I'm going to talk in first person, if I was Yotze already with the first carbon, this now is a carbon shlomim, and it requires shtayim shein arba. So the Gemara says, "My nafkamina, hatnan kol anitanim al mizbeach achitzon v'nesana b'matana achas kiper." The halacha is, even with regard to a carbon shlomim that requires two matanos, if there was one matana and the dam reached the mizbeach, one of the zavios of the mizbeach, he was yotze. So why not do a zrika on one matana? Now again, the whole premise of this sugya is that you cannot implement two matanos and say, you know what, I want to be machmir. There could possibly be a carbon pesach, and therefore all I needed was one matan. I'm going to add a second matan because maybe I was yotze with the first pesach, and this is a carbon shlamim, and it requires two matan. That you can't do. That's baltos. Meaning, on the side that this is a carbon pesach, to add another zrika, it's called baltosif. And that's a sugya Masechet Zvach, which I think maybe Ben would remember, maybe Don would remember from the good old days that we were learning Zvachim, when you had a mixture of two karbanos and you didn't know exactly how many matanas to give, because there was one, so it was machlokas tanaim about that, whether you should put on 4 or only a 1, and so forth and so on. And the maskadas hasugya is that, at least according to one chita, you have a problem about tosif if you add an extra matana. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute, why not do one matana? And the halacha is that although a carbon shlamim requires 2 matanas, that's only lechatchila, that's to embellish the mitzvah. But as far as the mitzvah itself is concerned, 1 matana is sufficient. And therefore, there's no bal tigron. I just want to take, I know I'm over time, but just to finish up, and we get up to the Mishnah. The Gemara says, Ella, mishum, the ilu pesach b'shvicha, the ilu shlamim bizrika. You think that 1 matana would suffice for both Pesach and for shlamim. That's not so. There are 2 different matanos. One is matana b'shvicha, and that's true for a carbon Pesach. Shvicha means that we take the mizrach all the way up to the mizbeach, and we just simply pour it gently, and it goes down the mizbeach. And shlamim requires zrika. Zrika means that the kohen, climbs up the kevesh, and he's at a distance from the mizbeach, and he does a forceful zrika. So Gemara says again, "Ma'inaf gemina." For a Tanya, we have a brisa that says, "Kol anitonim b'zrika, shenesanim b'shvicha yatsa." Even though a carbon shlamim requires zrika from a distance with an extra oomph, that's only lechatchila, to embellish the mitzvah of zrika, as far as the shlamim is concerned. But if he didn't do it that way, and the kohen accidentally did a shvicha, gently rolling the dam down the side of his back, he was yotze. And therefore, why not advocate that we, with this tnai, that we do a shvicha instead of a zrika? My answer is, Ema de kamrin b'yevet. But lechatchila nami, are we going to say lechatchila that we're going to put you in a situation where, because of this tnai, you're going to have to do it b'shvicha when it requires zrika? So again, even though b'di'evet, a shlam that requires shvicha, a shlam that requires zrika, you could be yotze with zrika, but nevertheless, lechatchila, to do the mitzvah properly, you have to do it with a zrika. But now you have a suffix, maybe it's a carbon pesach, you won't be able to do it with a zrika, and therefore 4 out of 5 of the people will be actively undermining the halach of zrika with regard to shlamim, because for 4 out of 5 people it's shlamim, and therefore we would rather drop the whole thing. And again, we're going to apply the same logic that we did before in Tosis, and it's going to be a violation for that one person who had the mum. It's going to be a violation of an Isa Kares passively, b'shevi al taseh, with a rove telling me that he's not even chayav in Pesach.